The resolution made yesterday in the UN is twisted, it is shameful, but we will overcome it.
An angry and defiant Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacts to last month's vote in the United Nations condemning Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. This is The Heat. That the United Nations and Israel don't agree on Israel's settlement activity is nothing new. In just one example, back in 2013, a report by the UN Human Rights Council called Israeli settlements in the occupied territories a violation of Palestinians' human rights. But this latest skirmish between Israel and the world body comes with an unusual twist. Amid cries that it was abandoning its staunch ally, the United States declined to use its veto, choosing instead to abstain from a resolution declaring that Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem had, quote, no legal validity and constituted a flagrant violation under international law. For more, we turn now to CGTN's Stephanie Freid in Tel Aviv. And Stephanie, let's take a listen to what U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had to say about some of the reasoning behind the U.S. decision to abstain.
No one thinking seriously about peace can ignore the reality of what the settlements pose to that peace. But the problem obviously goes well beyond settlements. Trends indicate a comprehensive effort to take the West Bank land for Israel and prevent any Palestinian development there.
So, Stephanie, though we have tough words coming from a U.S. administration towards Israel, Mr. Kerry, the Secretary of State, went on to question the viability of a two-state solution. What's been the reaction in Israel to that?
Well, in the short, the address that we just heard, within an hour of that address, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was live on national Israel television delivering his own rebuttal address, saying that the words of Mr. Kerry were biased against Israel. He also sidestepped the whole issue of settlement by posing the question, why would the U.S. Secretary of State be focusing on this issue when the entire Middle East is on fire? And when, according to the Prime Minister, the only democracy in the Middle East is Israel. Now, on the left side of the Israeli spectrum, there was actually some joy over Secretary of State Kerry's words. A few of the leading politicians on the left-wing side of the government said it's exactly what Israel's right-wing government needed to hear. Some tough words saying to the Israeli right-wing government that settlement is explosive, that continued policy is explosive, and that it will wreck any chances of a two-state peaceful solution between Palestinians and Israelis in the future. Anand?
Now, Stephanie, the President-elect Donald Trump, he's condemned the Obama administration's actions, and he tweeted that things will be different once he takes office on January 20th. Prime Minister Netanyahu appears to be looking forward to that as well. What can we expect, both in terms of bilateral relations and the prospects for peace?
Well, one indication is that on Monday, the Israeli Prime Minister's office announced that the Prime Minister will not be attending next week's conference, the World Economic Conference in Davos, Switzerland. Why? Because he's getting ready for a meeting with President-elect Donald Trump. There's been no date set yet, but there's a great amount of anticipation within Israel's right-wing government for the President-elect to step into office. Why is that? Because not only has Mr. Trump appointed a U.S. ambassador to Israel who has a history of supporting settlements, he has also promised repeatedly to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is a tremendous political statement, one that Israel's right-wing government embraces. However, Jordan, the neighboring country, is already warning about repercussions if that embassy is moved. And as well, on Monday, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas warned or issued a correspondence to President-elect Trump urging him, again, not to move that embassy because there will be repercussions. What type of repercussions? extreme violence could erupt not only Palestinian and on Israeli, also within the region, Arab countries versus Israel. So bilateral relations in the short term between Israel and the United States, yes, they could stand to improve with the current government in place. In the long term, the relations multilateral within the region don't look like they'll get any better, and the prospects for peace under President-elect Trump are not at the moment looking promising, and that's the prospects for peace between Palestinians and Israelis. Anand.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's CGTN Stephanie Freid reporting from Tel Aviv. Let's get to our panel. Hussein Ibish is a senior resident scholar with the Arab Gulf States Institute. He joins us here in our Washington studio. With us from Jerusalem is Amotz Asa-El. He's a senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post. And Perry Cammack is a fellow with the Middle East program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Perry, let me start with you. We heard there from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a very fierce reaction from him and from Israel, as well as some Jewish leaders here in the United States. But when we look at the wording of this resolution, when we look at what it actually says, is there anything new in it?
Well, there is and there isn't. On the one hand, there have been plenty of Security Council resolutions going back decades. There's very little here that's precisely new. But of course, political context is everything. This comes in the waning days of the Obama administration. It comes really at the end of a pretty acrimonious personal relationship between the outgoing president, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and amidst the anticipation, frankly, of potentially pretty big changes in approach from the incoming administration. So in the immediate term, there really, I would say, is not that much new here. But again, context matters a lot. And I think over time, it very well could be that different parties, the Europeans, the Arab states, international actors latch on to particular aspects of the resolution and see this as a way to try to stop or curtail Israeli settlement activity.
Right. Amotz, when we look at this, what is the view from Israel itself? I mean, is there anything in this resolution that obliges Israel to act in a certain way? What are the practical effects of this resolution for Israel?
No, in terms of practicalities, I think there is very little here, at least the way things are seen from Israel, very little that exceeds the declaratory. I very much agree with Hussein that this is primarily about the American-Israeli relationship, and within that, largely about the relationship between the outgoing American administration and the Netanyahu government, where there evidently has been a great deal of acrimony. And therefore, the question is not what is it exactly that we have witnessed several days ago at the Security Council, but what is it that we're in for 10 days hence when the Trump administration settles in and evidently the entire international system gets rebooted.
Hussein, as Perry mentioned, President Obama has decided to abstain in this vote, and this comes in the waning days of his administration. If he was serious about change, he would have done this right at the beginning of his administration.
Yes, I think, well, not necessarily in the beginning of his administration, but he certainly wouldn't have waited until a few days before leaving. So yes, there's very much a sense that this is a parting shot at Netanyahu, as Perry was saying, and I think as Amotz was agreeing, and also a kind of a cri de coeur, but it is definitely not connected to statecraft or policy in any way, because it comes at the very end. And one of the things that some of us take away from, especially the Kerry speech, more than the resolution, is that the administration really has a very deep and sophisticated, and has had for a long time, understanding of the threat to a two-state solution, but chose for various reasons, defensible or not, political and otherwise, a whole host of reasons not to do much, not to do anything massive or major, and not to spend too much political capital to try to shift that, and it's rather disappointing in a sense.
Perry, if we look at the resolution, which condemns settlements, condemns their legal validity, is Israel in violation of international law if it doesn't abide by these resolutions in the U.S.?
Certainly. By de facto, yes, they are. The issue is the enforcement mechanism. So what the resolution doesn't do, well, it creates strong language and probably unprecedented language in terms of settlement activity at the UN Security Council. it doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. So the direct impact, I think, will be pretty slow. In fact, I suspect actually the immediate result is we'll see more settlement activity, not less, both because as a reaction of the Netanyahu government to this resolution, but also given the changes that both my fellow panelists have mentioned. The real question in my mind is not what happens in the short term, but the longer term implications in terms of, again, what the European reaction, International Court of Justice, the Arab states, et cetera, et cetera.
Hussein?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think what's really interesting is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, in my view, has been trying actually to exacerbate tensions with the Obama administration in order to try to get even closer to the Trump team, to Donald Trump personally and the Trump team in mutual antipathy to President Obama, mutual opposition to Obama and Kerry. I'm not sure this is going to work out for him. Mr. Trump is very unpredictable. If Mr. Netanyahu gets a carte blanche from Mr. Trump, he won't be able to say to settlers and others, well, we have to restrain ourselves because of America. Also, he may find that an America First president is very indulgent until he isn't. And then he's even less patient than other Republicans and Democrats have been.
Right.
And finally, Mr. Trump has spoken about himself as a deal maker. This is the ultimate deal and the need to be neutral. So if he gets it into his head to try to do something, it could be very surprising to Mr. Netanyahu.
But the one thing we should say about the relationship between Netanyahu and the Obama administration, that he may have had a bad relationship with Obama, but he had enormous support from Congress.
Well, yeah, I mean, the special relationship between Israel and the United States is a settled matter in the American mainstream. It's not really debated. So the basic contours of the relationship and the essential American commitment to Israel's security and basic interests is not really debated on either side. And that was true of the Clinton-Trump race as well, so it didn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Amotz, what are the legal implications for Israel in terms of this resolution and other resolutions that have been passed by the UN?
I think that the legal side of the entire equation is actually the less dramatic. We have been now for 50 years in a situation whereby Israel was in disagreement with its allies, let alone with the rest of the world, concerning the legal status of the territories that were conquered by Israel in 1967. The gist of the controversy is that the rest of the world tells Israel that this is occupied territory where, according to international law, the occupier is not allowed to build settlements, whereas Israeli courts have ruled that since the lands conquered in 1967 did not previously belong to an internationally recognized sovereign, namely, they had previously been governed by Jordan, whose rule was not recognized by the entire world except for Pakistan. And prior to that, it was only the British mandate that no longer exists, that because of this, a lack of a previous internationally recognized sovereign, this is not the kind of land in which international law prohibits the construction of new settlements. That has been the Israeli interpretation of international law, and this controversy is not new. What is new now is that you also have Russia occupying Crimea and settling there new Russian populations exactly in the same manner that Israel is being challenged for doing in the West Bank. And indeed, this has also been the situation for more than 40 years now in Cyprus with Turkey, and this has before that been the situation with the northern Japanese islands that Japan to this day claims from Russia because they were conquered by the Soviet Union at the end of World War II. In short, the legal aspect of the situation is really the less significant one. The significant one is the diplomatic situation.
Amos could have thrown into that mix Western Sahara as well. So there are other places where this kind of thing goes on. But the Israeli foreign minister, the Israeli foreign ministry in 1967 asked its main legal advisor, Theodore Meron, what about settlement activity? And he issued a paper that anyone can read online that you know, it very clearly recognized that international law prohibited civilian settlement activity. What I'm getting at is that Israel actually knows that it's violating the Fourth Geneva Convention, but that's an irrelevant fact from the Israeli political point of view, and he's right.
But is Israel violating international law? Because it says there was no country here. How can we be occupying a place?
Well, it is in the sense that the UN Security Council resolution has declared it so.
Right.
So that it's strong language. It's not binding in the sense that it's not a Chapter 7 resolution, meaning there's no enforcement mechanism. But I think I'm not an international jurist myself. I think most international lawyers would say it's a pretty clear-cut issue that it is a violation. The question is what to do about it, given the state of the dysfunctionality in the Security Council that we've seen over the last several years, given the likelihood anyway that the Trump administration will downgrade the importance of this issue vis-a-vis other issues. The question, and I think Amos was making reference to this, is so what? We have this resolution, so what? Again, my view is, in the short run, we're not likely to see much, but I think it does create an important precedent, which could have more significant impact over time, measured in years and even decades, frankly.
I mean, Israel is vulnerable on this issue, as European efforts to recognize and trade with Israel, but boycott settlement activity have demonstrated. And the Israelis conflate all kinds of boycotts against settlements and boycotts against Israel in general together to confuse the issue. But I think the European position that Israel should be recognized and is legitimate, but the settlements are illegal and shouldn't be supported or indulged or subsidized in any way will probably spread. It's very important for your viewers to know that the reason that the Fourth Geneva Convention, drafted immediately after the Second World War, made it illegal to settle occupied territories in Article 49, Paragraph 6, as the Red Cross drafting notes show, is that during World War II, the Axis powers, especially Germany and Japan, had abused occupied peoples by precisely colonizing their territories. So this is a human rights issue. People who find themselves under the rule of foreign armies for whatever reason have a right not to have their land taken away from them and given to somebody else. It's a very simple, very basic human rights issue, and that gets lost in the political question, the question of the diplomatic consequences, which are really very important. But we should remember that at heart, this is about a human rights issue of people who are defenseless because they're being ruled by a foreign army, and they have some basic human rights that are being violated here.
If I could add just a very quick
it's
point
a bit
here.
more complex
I think actually,
and I think I should clarify
I'll get to you in a moment. I just want to get Perry. Go ahead.
Very quickly, I think actually the most important operative language of this new resolution is it actually calls on countries to differentiate between Israel proper and the settlement. So that actually creates a mechanism, again, over time to do what Hussein is talking about.
Amotz, you wanted to say?
Yes, I wanted to say, first of all, that Israel has placed on the counter twice in recent decades the entire West Bank, or almost the entire West Bank, certainly the bulk of the settlements, once in the year 2000 at Camp David in the talks presided over by Bill Clinton between Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and Palestinian leader of the day, Yasser Arafat, and then in 2008 in the talks between Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas. And Israel found the Palestinian side unwilling to sign on the dotted line and strike the deal. And that was extremely frustrating, especially for us mainstream Israelis who very deeply wanted that kind of deal and wanted peace in turn for land. We found the implementation of this formula impractical.
Both sides have made offers
that genuinely wanted this deal.
In fact, both sides have made many offers. The other side has never fully accepted them. So there isn't an agreement. It's very tragic. I agree.
We need to take a break right now. More of our conversation when we return. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.